Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this retrospective. This time I'm covering the Wii U download games. As kind of a follow-up to my first ever retrospective in which I covered Wii U physical games, I've always meant to get to the download stuff on every console. This has been a long time coming because I really wasn't into the download scene on the Wii U. I did have a couple favorite games, but didn't really play that much, so I was excited to go back to it, especially considering how much of a big deal Nintendo made when they said they were bringing indies to the Wii U. They had announced well over 100 indie games coming to the console at one point, so I was excited to go back and see what I missed. Unfortunately, it doesn't really seem like that much. Altogether, there are over 400 downloads on the Wii U eShop, not including virtual console games. So I was expecting to find a ton of great stuff in there. Unfortunately, there are so many games, and so few are actually good and exclusive to the Wii U. If you've seen any of my previous retrospectives, you would know that I focus on exclusive games up front. Eventually I'll get to multi-platform stuff, but for now I just really want to focus on the exclusives that make a system special. So usually I only cover those exclusives, but there's not that much to talk about here, so I'm going to include some games that I feel like were most notable when they were first released on the Wii U, and later may have gone to other platforms. For the most part, a lot of the games on the Wii U eShop are ports of very basic mobile games, and a lot are really just shovelware. Nintendo talked a lot about supporting devs, but at the end of the day, I don't think they really put that effort forward. I remember a story about Undertale where they really wanted to get that game on their console. Obviously, I don't know how the deal went down, but it didn't come out on that. Eventually, it came to PS4 instead, so you'd think a game as big as that, Nintendo would front them to do a port or just rebuild it from scratch on a different engine, but they never went that route, so Nintendo's commitment to indie games was kind of, I think, just a way to compete with the other consoles, but they never really had their heart in it. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. The first batch of Wii U download games was actually pretty promising. 4 of the launch games from November 2012 are worth noting. The first is Chasing Aurora, which is a stylish bird flight racing game. It features 5-player local co-op and a single-player mode with 20 different tracks. As far as I know, this is still a Wii U exclusive. We also got Little Inferno, which is a stylish puzzle game that takes place in front of a fireplace where you experiment with setting objects on fire. This was recently re-released on the Switch. Mighty Switch Force Hyperdrive Edition was a WayForward platformer with an interesting mechanic where you could switch the environment at the press of a button. This let you swap out what platforms were active on the fly and really made for some interesting platform challenges. The goal of each stage was to rescue civilians and use the switch mechanic to move through the levels. The last of those 2012 games is Nano Assault Neo, which is a follow-up to the DS, 3DS shoot-'em-up titles Nanostring and Nano Assault. It is a twin-stick shooter where you pilot a capsule destroying a microscopic virus. It was ported to the PS4 2 years later. And that was all for the launch year. I mean, if you remember, the system launched at the end of 2012, so I don't expect too much more, but let's get right into 2013. The first game we get is Pokemon Rumble U, so this is a follow-up to the 3DS title. It's a fun Pokemon action game where you take your Pokemon toys through several arenas, fighting other Pokemons and collecting new Pokemon toys to play as. There's a story mode, and there's a lot more depth in the original. This game is really worth checking out if you're a big Pokemon fan. You've probably played the free 3DS version. This one is worth checking out as well. Following that, we got Mighty Switch Force 2, so a follow-up to that original launch platformer. The big change in this one is now instead of like a police officer, you play a firefighter, and your gun has been replaced with a water cannon that can put out fires. Now this one obviously came out physically later, but it's very notable for its original digital release, which is NES Remix. This is Volume 1 of NES Remix, which took NES games and broke them into bite-sized challenges. It featured challenges from 16 games, including stuff like Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong, and Zelda. The last notable game released at the end of December in 2013 is Dr. Luigi, so the last game in Nintendo's Year of Luigi series, and it's kind of a take on Dr. Mario. You play as Luigi, and you can play the original gameplay mode or 3 new modes. One includes L-shaped pieces instead of just pills. Moving on to 2014, we get NES Remix Volume 2, so the follow-up to the first game. It's basically the same, but now it features 13 new NES games. The game selection is better here, even if there's a couple less games, and it includes games like Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3, Zelda 2, Kid Icarus, Metroid, Kirby, and Punch-Out! Following that, we get Scram Kitty and His Buddy on Rails, which is a weird sounding game, but a pretty great game. It's a cool mix of a platformer and a shoot-'em-up. There's an updated DX version that was released on the PS4 and Vita, so you can also play it that way now. We also get It'll Do, which is a fun Zelda-inspired action game with a hand-drawn art style. The sequel was recently released on Switch, and this is worth checking out the original. We also got Pushmo World, which is a follow-up to the 3DS puzzle games Pushmo and Crashmo. Pushmo World features 250 puzzles that require the player to push shapes into the background and make a new path through the level. An interesting title following that is Tegami, which is an adventure game with a Japanese papercraft pop-up book style. It looks really neat, the art is really incredible. The puzzles revolve around changing the environment to get through each stage. Moving into 2015, we get Mario vs. Donkey Kong Tipping Stars. This is the 6th game on the lesser-known Mario puzzle series that's mostly on portables. You could compare the gameplay to something like Lemmings. It's also on the 3DS. Like the previous games, the gameplay revolves around guiding toys to the end of a stage by using the touchscreen to create ramps and platforms for them to move along. Next up is Elliot Quest, which is an adventure platformer, which is on many consoles now, but it had about 2 years as a Wii U exclusive. The game is kind of comparable to Zelda 2. It's got a top-down style map screen, and that connects you to different side-scrolling platform stages where you can get new items and abilities to get through the levels. Just to give people a little bit more to do with their amiibos, Nintendo released Amiibo Tap, Nintendo's Greatest Bits. Now this is a really interesting demo. You load it up on your Wii U and you tap any of your amiibos on it, and each amiibo unlocks a different kind of virtual console demo. So there are 22 NES games and 8 Super Nintendo games. They are all first-party Nintendo games, so like the Zeldas, the Marios, Kirby's, that kind of stuff. And tapping an amiibo unlocks a random game on there. Each game you can play for 3 minutes, and there are different scenes you can pick from that game to play. So it's a really interesting way to use your amiibo. Next up is Affordable Space Adventures, which is a puzzle adventure game that's still exclusive, probably because it relies so heavily on the gamepad touch controls. In the game, the player has purchased an exploration space adventure package, and their ship ends up crashing on a hostile environment. The player has to solve a series of puzzles by controlling their small ship to interact with the environment. Next up is Nihil Umbra, a puzzle platformer in which the player tries to escape the void and learn more about their character. The game features 5 different areas. In each area you unlock a new color ability which allows the player to paint the environment, and that causes different effects to help them get through the challenges. This game is also available on mobile devices and Vita. Then we get Swords and Soldiers 2, which is a follow-up to the 2D side-scrolling strategy game. The first game made it to other platforms, but I think the sequel is still exclusive to the Wii U. Like the original game, this one features 3 different factions. The Vikings return and are now joined by new factions, the Demons and Persians. Next up, we get a collection of 3DS games. The GUNMAN CLIVE HD collection takes the 2 games from the 3DS and brings them together on the Wii U. Now, these are kind of these side-scrolling run-and-gun shooters, which are really basic but interesting art style. They're worth checking out. Following that, we get Year Walk, which is a grim narrative storybook adventure based on a Swedish traditional tale. This is a cool-looking game that's great for fans of narrative games. Next up is Freedom Planet, one of my personal favorites. For a long time, this was one of the best Wii U exclusives you could get. Now it's available on the PS4 as well, but I highly recommend you check it out no matter where you get it. This game is a love letter to the original Sonic games. It started as a Sonic fan game before getting funded on Kickstarter as Freedom Planet. It has 3 playable characters with different moves and abilities, and before Sonic Mania, this was really one of the best Sonic games out there. Next up is Rivers of Alice Extended Edition. This is still an exclusive game to the Wii U, and it's an adventure game with a really neat watercolor/sketch art style. It's got an interesting storyline, and again, just another cool narrative adventure game worth checking out for fans of those genres. My personal favorite, and also I think a real shame what they did to this game, because we're talking about Fatal Frame, Maiden of Black Water, and this is a game that should have been released physically. It's just too big of a download. If you're going to download this, you need an external hard drive. I don't even think you can download it on a 16 gig system. Nintendo of America just doesn't seem to have the faith in this series, and it's a shame because it's one of my favorite horror series. It's a great survival horror game that was only put out digitally, and I think that really hurt it. This game is a survival horror game where the player must explore an area haunted by vengeful ghosts. They have a camera that they can use to exorcise the ghosts. The game features a new environment for the series, which is a big open area that the player can explore. A sense mechanic helps guide them through the area while they're trying to complete different objectives in different chapters. But, it's a new story for the series. It's a new open style of gameplay. It's really cool. I highly recommend it. Human Resource Machine, which is a fun puzzle game that's also available on the Switch now. The game has the player working in a corporate company and has to complete puzzles using programming logic in order to complete their tasks. The last game for the year is Fast Racing League Neo. Now this is a sequel to Fast Racing League, which was released as a Wii download game, and there was an expanded version of this released on the Switch. This is a futuristic racer compared to games like Wipeout and F-Zero, and it's most notable because people actually say it's a pretty good alternative for F-Zero for fans of that series, because Nintendo hasn't really put out one of those in a while. The first game of 2016 worth mentioning is Shadow Puppeteer, which is not a great game, but it's a really interesting one, and it's still a Wii U exclusive. The game has an interesting gameplay and level designs. The player controls a boy and his shadow who can manipulate light sources in order to solve puzzles. The game is best played co-op with one friend controlling the shadow. Next up is Sashimi, which is an interesting mix of a colorful aquatic-themed shoot-'em-up with WarioWare-style micro-sized challenges. Following that we get Star Ghost, which is a fun and visually interesting shoot-'em-up with a unique control scheme and interesting level design. The game has stages in 12 different solar systems. Following that we get Lovely Planet, which is a really strange first-person shooter that takes place in a colorful and abstract world. Next up is Lost Reavers, which is a complete surprise compared to other Wii U download games, not necessarily because it's good, but more because it seems to be a real attempt to bring some advanced features to the Wii U network. The game is a free-to-play online action game published by Namco Bandai. It's mostly a third-person action game with shooting and melee attacks that has 4 players taking on various missions together, moving through rooms in a dungeon. Again, the reason this is really notable is because of its online features. Following that, we get Mini Mario and his Friends Amiibo Challenge. So this is a free download that was on Wii U and 3DS, and it uses the Mario vs. Donkey Kong game design, but it lets the player play the stages with their amiibos. There are 11 characters, and each have different abilities that are unlocked by using your amiibo. The game has 50 stages, and they can be played by 11 different amiibo. In an interesting move, several months after the game came out, Nintendo put out a demo for Star Fox Zero called Star Fox Zero Training Begins. Now, this is just a demo that includes the training mode from the Star Fox Zero game, but it also includes an animated short that is worth checking out for Star Fox fans. Following that, we get Shadow Archer, which is an arcade-style top-down game. It kind of looks like they took the combat from the original Legend of Zelda, but left out all the dungeons and mazes. It's a fairly simple game, but it's a pretty fun one at that. Next up is Noitu Love De-Evolution. This is an intense side-scrolling action game that's definitely one of the best on the system. It's inspired by games like Contra and Castlevania, but it most closely resembles Metal Slug. This one's also available on the 3DS now. Following that, we get Severed, which is a cool mix of a first-person dungeon crawler and a first-person melee combat game. The game's by Drinkbox, who had previously released Guacamelee. It's also available on the 3DS and Switch and Vita now, but this was the first console version. The last game for 2016 worth mentioning is Tadpole Treble, which is a cute rhythm game with a lot of personality. The game features a ton of 8-bit and 16-bit style music. In the game, you guide a tadpole through stages, dodging obstacles on stages designed like music staffs. Following that, game releases continued until quite recently. There may even be more coming. But everything from that point on was just pretty bad shovelware or Android ports, just nothing really worth checking out. Downloads have mainly moved to the Switch, which is really picking up. There's a ton of great indie games on there. It's really competing with the other platforms for great download experiences. So sadly, I think there's a couple great games on there, but overall just not a super strong library for Wii U downloads, which is a shame compared to the Wii, which I'm really excited to talk about sometime soon, so stay tuned for that episode. I'll also cover some Virtual Console games, but I'll probably have to do the Wii before I do the Wii U, but expect those sometime soon too. I'll see you next time. Bye.